in spirit and in truth, and we appreciate those of you who are with us in person. If you happen to be following along online, either because of health or other issues, or maybe you're just coming in contact with our services, we invite you to come as you can in person as well. On social media, not too awful long ago, Jennifer Turner shared a picture from a few years ago. And she was at services here, and I didn't know this at the time, but she apparently took out her phone and took a picture. And it was a picture of Brother Marion and Brother Ike, and I believe Brother Paul was also in the frame as well. And I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of, "I love these men, and I appreciate the generation that they represent." And I can certainly amen that sentiment. I appreciate those of that generation and their wives who make up our examples in this congregation, and Brother Marion, Brother Ike, Brother Paul, and so many others, Brother Ken, and I can't name them all, who do such a good job of setting the example for us in worship and beyond. We appreciate you so much. You can open your Bibles this morning to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Let me tell you how I arrived at this sermon this morning. For the last few weeks, in the back of my mind has been a question about luck, chance. As we flip our calendars, we often say things like good luck in a new year. I wish you good fortune as the new year begins. And maybe in other aspects of our life, we talk about luck, we talk about chance. And my question in the back of my mind was how does that fit into God and an understanding of an omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent God? And so I studied some myself, I meditated some myself, I even reached out to some preacher friends of mine whom I highly respect, and we went back and forth with some ideas, and then I began to really do some study. And my study brought me to Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. In Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11, Solomon has been investigating the root of happiness. That's really what Ecclesiastes is all about. Solomon has sought happiness in life, and he essentially goes by process of elimination, and he tries everything and approaches it in a somewhat scientific way. I've got a hypothesis, I'm going to test the hypothesis and see if this brings happiness or if that brings happiness. And Ecclesiastes 9 verse 11 begins by Solomon writing, "I returned." So he returns to sort of investigate his evidence. And here's a conclusion that he reaches. He says, "I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all." Time and chance happen to everybody. What does that mean? How do we interpret Solomon's statement in light of everything else he said, in light of what we know about God, in light of what we know about the world? What does this mean to you and me? And this really brought me to a place that I didn't expect to go in this sermon. We've mentioned at the introduction of our services those who are sick, those who are dealing with circumstances beyond their control. This sermon is going to have something to say to those of us who might be dealing with those types of things. I didn't expect it to, but that's where we have arrived in our study this morning. So time and chance. So let's see if we can try to work out what this verse and what the context is teaching us. First of all, we see that statement, under the sun. That is going to tell us what we need to know about the framework that Solomon is working with. He's not talking about an understanding of God in the sense of His overall working in the scheme of redemption or anything like that. Solomon's perspective is here on earth, under the sun, the things that happen in our lives on earth. And we need to remember that context. Solomon isn't talking about what happens after death and our fate for eternity in heaven or hell. He's not talking about that right now. In fact, some 29 times in Ecclesiastes, Solomon uses that phrase, under the sun. Now here's what's really interesting. The last time he uses the phrase under the sun is chapter 10. File that away for future reference in this sermon. So we have 29 times that phrase, under the sun, indicating that Solomon is considering the things that happen in your life and mine while we live and walk upon this earth. That's what he's talking about. So Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 11 says that he returned and considered the works under the sun, the things that happen in our lives. Okay? Now, number 2, he gives us the framework that everything in life really works under, the umbrella that covers everything in life, the work of God. We go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 8, and we see the context here. We pick up in verse 16. Ecclesiastes 8, verse 16. And Solomon says, when I applied mine heart to know wisdom, and to see the business that is done upon the earth. Notice what he says, the business done upon the earth. That's the same as the work that happens under the sun. The things that happen in our everyday lives as we go from birth to death. So he saw the business that is done upon the earth, for also there is that neither night nor day seeth sleep with his eyes. Then I beheld, verse 17, all the work of God. That's everything that happens. Solomon understands that ultimately everything that happens in life is under the umbrella of the work of God. God is in control of life. No matter what we're experiencing at this very moment, there is never a time when God is not in control. So he says, I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. Because though a man labor to seek it out, yet shall he not find it. Yea, further, though a wise man think to know it, yet shall he not be able to find it. You see, our knowledge has an ending point because it's not our work. Everything that happens ultimately doesn't fall under the umbrella of me. It falls under the umbrella of God. And so there are always going to be questions that I can't answer. There are always going to be things that I can't find out, that I can't discover, because it's not me who is in control. Ultimately, it's God. And so it's in that framework under the sun, God is ultimately in control, and everything that passes through the course of time ultimately is under God's control. And that's a statement that Solomon makes in Ecclesiastes 8. Verses 16 and 17. So we see this framework. Things that happen under the sun, all with an understanding that God ultimately is in control. But don't you and I still have questions? Don't you? Don't we still struggle to find the answers to the problems that we deal with in life? This framework doesn't ultimately satisfy all of the questions that we have. And so that's what Solomon is grappling with. So let's go back to Ecclesiastes 9:11. And in the midst of getting to time and chance, I want you to notice what Solomon enumerates as he goes through here. He lists the contributions that you and I make to this under the sun world, to this umbrella of the work of God. You see, because we still do things. We have responsibilities, we have obligations, and we have a part to play in the work of God, in the under the sun world. What is the work? What is the contribution that we make? Well, notice what he lists. In Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 11, here's what he says. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift. So he first addresses the swiftness of man. God expects us to get to work and to do it now rather than later. God expects us to be swift. And that's commanded all throughout the Bible. James 1 and verse 19, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. God says, get your ears in motion and do it now. Open up your mind, open up your ears, open up your heart. Do it now. Don't do it later. In Ephesians 5 and verse 16, we are to redeem the time. Make use of it right now. He's going to go on to say, because the days are evil. We'll talk about that in just a moment. In John 9 and verse 4, Jesus said, I must work the works of Him that sent me while it is day. The night comes when no man can work. Jesus says, I've got to do it now because I won't be able to do it later. So we understand our obligation to be swift. You and I have a part to play in the unfolding of all that happens on this earth. And part of that means to get busy, and to get busy now. The strength of man. Notice he continues in verse 11, I returned and saw under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Now you and I are commanded to be strong, aren't we? How many times was Joshua told to be strong and of good courage in Joshua chapter 1 as he was taking the mantle from Moses to lead the nation of Israel? Throughout the book of Numbers and all the way to 2 Timothy, the phrase be strong shows up 36 times in a myriad of contexts to a myriad of people, all coming from God with the instruction to be strong. You and I are commanded to be strong. We're commanded to be swift. Notice what else he says. Ecclesiastes 9:11, I returned and saw under the sun, the race is not to the swift, the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise. Aren't we supposed to be wise? Didn't Jesus tell His disciples when He sent them out on the limited commission, be ye wise as serpents and harmless as doves? We're commanded to be wise. Isn't that what the book of Proverbs is all about? He says in Proverbs 4 and verse 7 that wisdom is the principal thing. I mean, it's the most important thing to seek. Therefore, with all of your getting, get wisdom. It's the most important thing. We recognize wisdom is important. We are to be strong. We are to be swift. Notice he continues in verse 11, nor yet favor to men of skill. I skipped riches to men of understanding because wisdom and understanding sort of go hand in hand. And then he says, nor yet favor to men of skill. Aren't we supposed to be skilled and put our skill to work? I mean, isn't that what the parable of the talents is all about? Taking your skill, putting it to work? The man who buried his talent in the ground, he didn't make use of the things that God had given him. Our job is to make use of what God gives us, whether it's money or talent or time or whatever it might be. We're to put to use our skills. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 4, Paul says that there's one body, but there's a diversity of abilities within that one body. And he talks about the nose and the ear and the smelling and the hearing and how it all must work together. We've all got our parts to play. We've got to put our skills to use, right? I want you to look at the picture that Solomon's painted. In this life under the sun, you and I all have obligations. We've all got to work. We've got to be swift. We've got to be wise. We've got to be skilled. We've got to be strong. And you and I, to the best of our abilities, more often than not, we strive to do those things. We want to do the right things at the right times, in the right ways, and we do it. But inevitably, there comes a situation where things happen that aren't connected to our strength, our skill, our wisdom, or our speed. And I want you to notice where Solomon goes next. After saying in verse 11 that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill. You see, up until this point, the entirety of the book of Ecclesiastes has praised those things: hard work, wisdom, understanding, responsibility, using your skills. All of those things have been praised and glorified. But then Solomon brings all of his evidence and he puts it on a table, so to speak, in front of him, and he sorts it all out. And here's what he says. After all of those things, there's still something that you and I can't control: time and chance happen to them all. You see, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how wise you are, no matter how rich you are, no matter how swift you are, time and chance will happen anyway. And Solomon, I can sort of see him sitting down at his desk, contemplating all of the things he's experienced and all of the things he's learned and all of the data he's collected, and saying there are still two variables I can't account for: time and chance. And so here you and I sit today, grappling with the very same two variables that Solomon couldn't control: time and chance. So what about it? What are these two variables? What is time? Now, I'm not asking in some existential way, what is time? No, I'm saying, what is Solomon talking about? Well, he tells us. If you look at verse 12, for man also knoweth not his what? His time. As the fishes that are taken in an evil net, as the birds that are caught in the snare, so are the sons of men snared in an evil time when it falleth suddenly upon them. It what? Ultimately, death. You see, time, as Solomon is talking about it, is about change. The inevitability of forward movement towards some end. And the ultimate end is death. And Solomon says, I don't care how wise you are, I don't care how skilled you are, I don't care how swift you are, I don't care how rich you are, you can't control the forward passage of time and all of the things that go along with it, ultimately leading us in a slow march to our own demise. If we look at life under the sun, it all moves in one direction. And it's something that you and I can't control. And Solomon struggles with that. He grapples with that right here. Now, some change is positive, isn't it? My wife and I differ in our approach to our children growing up. I'm excited to witness the changes, not all the changes, most of the changes that take place with our children. When I think about them getting jobs and getting married and having children, it excites me. Danielle wants to wring her hands about many of those same things and worry and concern. Some change is positive, isn't it? I'm glad that time has passed and I've gotten the privilege to experience so many wonderful things. But most often, the change that time forces upon us is negative. And that's what Solomon has in mind in particular. That evil net. Now, not evil. If you sweep a net through the water and you catch a fish, that net's not evil. It's just a tool, right? Time is not evil. But it's evil in the sense that you and I can't control it. It's out of our hands. It's out of our reach. And so we can't stop the passage of time. We can't lean up against it and make it slow down. We can't avoid the consequences of time. Matthew 6 and verse 34, don't take thought for the morrow. Why? Because tomorrow will take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Not evil in the sense of bad evil, but time ticks by whether you want it to or not. So you might as well just live in the moment. That's what Jesus says. We see that Paul in Ephesians 5 says the same thing, redeeming the time. Why? Because the days are evil. Time is fleeting. Time's against you. Time is not on your side. And you can't stop it. You can't hit pause. And Solomon couldn't figure out how to do that either. Time. But then here's what brought me here this morning. Chance. What is chance? Well, I guess a good working definition, chance, means those events with no apparent connection to my skill, my speed, my wisdom, my wealth, my abilities, my strength. When all of my power and understanding has been exhausted, there are still things that happen. Well, that's chance. But when we think of chance and luck, I think we often think about these things that are unpredictable, uncontrollable, and that are so out of the realm of everything that there's just nothing we can do, just throw up our hands, right? But I think if we really look closely, maybe we see something different. You see, I think a lot of this we've taken from the world that's against God. Because according to the world, when you take out God, everything is just chance, right? We're just random happenings in a universe that's just random. And everything that happened just happened as a result of some hiccup in the span of time. Well, that's not true. But we take that and we apply it to our lives and we say, well, nothing matters anyway because you can't control it. It's just chance. And we just throw our hands up at God. But I think sometimes chance is connected, number one, to a lack of understanding. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is sometimes we can't see the spider web of interconnected things. I mean, imagine if you took a step back and you tried to draw the marks of connection between people and events. How quickly would you and I get confused and over our heads, right? I mean, this world is so interconnected. I'll never forget going to Disney World in 7th grade. I'm from Dyersburg, Tennessee, a city about the same size as McMinnville. And you go to Disney World in the middle of June, and who do you see but someone from Dyersburg? And you think, well, I can't believe that. You fly to India or wherever, and inevitably there's always a connection, right? Somewhere back to something, right? The interconnectedness of the world is so hard for us to recognize. And how many of the things that we just chalk up to chance are connected to somebody's decisions, somebody's actions, somebody's thoughts, somebody's words? I find that interesting. But number two, sometimes when we look at chance, we lack perspective. In Isaiah 46 and verse 10, it said of God, verse 9 says, there is none like Him, like God. And verse 10 gives us why. He declares the end from the beginning. God can see everything all at once, including the decisions that you and I make or don't make, the actions, the thoughts, the words that we say and do or don't say or do, along with those of every person who has lived, is living, and will live. I can't understand that, and I certainly can't see that. I can't remember what I did yesterday, and I probably have a hard time remembering what I'm going to do tomorrow. But God sees this interconnected web of all of the actions and decisions and thoughts and words and how they will play out. And God designs His ultimate will in connection with all of those things. Can I give you an example? Joseph. How many of the things that happened to Joseph otherwise could be chalked up to chance? His brothers are angry with him, not because of anything Joseph did wrong, and they say, hey, let's throw him in a pit. Oh, and it just so happens a group comes by, and they sell him into slavery. And it just so happens Potiphar. It just so happens Potiphar's wife. It just so happens he's in prison with a baker and a butler. And it just so happens. And it just so happens. And it just so happens. Now, did God cause those events? Absolutely not. Those are events of chance. But they were results of somebody's actions and decisions, weren't they? In every one of those instances, somebody's decisions, somebody's actions put Joseph in that situation, but they were out of his control. But then we make one amendment to that statement. Joseph's character played a part in how those things turned out. Joseph couldn't control being in a pit, being in slavery, being in Potiphar's house necessarily, being in prison, but you know what he could control? His response in every one of those moments. And his actions and his decisions and his thoughts and his words affected what came next. In those moments of chance, Joseph could look back at the end and say what? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God used all of these moments of chance to accomplish His purpose. You see, Joseph didn't know that in the moment. His brothers didn't know that in the moment. If you and I had been there, we didn't know that in the moment. But God did. God did. Lack of understanding, maybe a lack of perspective. But there are still things that happen. And we can't connect them to anybody's actions or decisions. And we certainly don't have the perspective to see what might happen next. And I'm certainly not saying that this bad event happens so that this good event can happen. That's not how it works. But you see, we have an enemy. And we can't talk about chance without talking about Satan. I didn't expect for this sermon to come here. I didn't expect to think about this and to investigate this and to come to this point. But then, I thought, how many of the chance events that you and I struggle with are the result of a world created by sin? How many of the diseases that are in this world came through the door that Satan opened in Genesis chapter 3? Well, the answer is all of them. And our world changed necessarily when Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden. And Satan had his hands all over that. But then something very interesting occurs in the book of Job. In Job chapter 1, and if you have time, you can go back and you can read verses 13 through 19, in which Satan comes before God and he has a conversation with God about Job. And Satan says, well, if you let me smite him, he will curse you to his face. And so God says you can affect everything around him, but not him. And so what happens? If you look through verses 13 through 19, how many of the events that occur are chance events? A wind comes by and blows down the room in which all of his sons are. A group comes by and kills the servants in the field. Well, those are chance occurrences. But Satan weaponized those events against Job. Job chapter 2. Well, that's just fine and dandy, but you've built a hedge around Job. If you let me attack him personally, he will curse you to his face. You can take his health, but don't take his life, God says. And so Satan does just that. Those events that happen to Job are by and large the same events that happen to you and me. The people that we listed in our introductory remarks are struggling with serious health issues. And for Job, Satan weaponized those events in an attempt to get Job to reject God. We fast forward. In the New Testament, Jesus says to Peter, behold, Satan has desired to have you that he may sift you as wheat. But I've prayed for you that your faith will fail not, and when you are converted, strengthen the brethren. What was going on at that very moment? All of these chance events. Judas preparing to give up Jesus to the authorities. Those same authorities plotting to hold a kangaroo court by which they would convict Jesus. They would crucify Him, and He would be placed in a tomb. Those events, Satan was weaponizing them against Peter at that very moment. And Peter was going to have to make a choice how to respond. Because after all, time and chance happen to us all. And sometimes we lack understanding, and sometimes we lack perspective. But we always have an enemy who will weaponize the things that happen in our lives in an attempt to separate us from God. In James 1 and verse 13, James says, "Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. God cannot be tempted of evil, neither tempteth he any man." The implication is those things are in the hands of Satan. So we recognize this morning, time and chance happen to us all. You see, you and I live under the sun. We live in a world that is ultimately under God's control. And within that world and under that sun, we have skills and we have strengths and we have wisdom and we have all of these things that we undertake to do, and we strive to do the right things at the right times in the right ways. And yet we cannot avoid time and chance. But we certainly can control how we respond. I told you it was interesting that phrase, under the sun, occurred often in chapters 1 through 10 of Ecclesiastes. But I find it interesting that phrase doesn't occur in chapters 11 or 12. Because you see, in chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes, the perspective changes. And no longer is Solomon overwhelmed with time and chance under the sun. I want you to look with me in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, and I want you to see how things change. If you pick up in verse number 8, Solomon writes these words, "But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that cometh is vanity." Solomon says, if you find yourself in a moment on the top of the mountain, I need you to understand that the valley can still come. Now conversely, if you find yourself in the depths of the valley, understand that the heights can still come. But then he goes a step farther in verse 9, and notice what he says. "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart." Things can be great. Life can be so meaningful. It can be so full of promise and blessings. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. You see, what Solomon learned when he gathered all of this evidence, when he put it all on the table before him, so to speak, when he filtered through it all and determined that everything ultimately ran smack dab into time and chance, he said the ultimate conclusion is, God is wanting me not to look down, but to look up. That's something else. At not the beginning and not the middle, but at the end. All these things God will bring us into judgment. In verse 10 he says, "Therefore remove sorrow from thy heart, put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity." He says, look up. And then ultimately in chapter 12, the force of all of this comes to the ultimate conclusion. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep His commandments. This is the whole of man. You see, since we run into time and chance, since no matter how much skill, no matter how much understanding, no matter how much wealth, no matter how much speed you possess, since no matter any of those things, you and I will run into the same end under the sun, since that is the case, fear God and keep His commandments. For this is the whole of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing that you've done, whether it's good or bad. See, as Solomon investigated life, he understood there were things looming ahead that he could not control. And you and I, if we have lived for any amount of time, we understand the same. if we have struggled through the difficulties of health issues, other unforeseen or uncontrollable things, then we have witnessed the weight of time and chance. But Solomon says ultimately that's not the focus. The focus is heaven. The God who is bringing all of these events to an ultimate conclusion, who has the end in mind throughout it all, that same God will bring you and me before Him at the great last day. And so this morning, as you and I live under the sun, may we consider the same. This morning, you and I are all victims of time and chance. But we are also children of an all-powerful God who desires for every one of us to be with Him for eternity. The Lord is not slack concerning His promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Even now, He desires for you, no matter what's going on, no matter whether you're at the heights of the mountain or the depths of the valley, God desires for you to come to repentance, to find forgiveness through the blood of His Son, to confess that Jesus is the Christ, to be buried with Him in baptism and contact that blood and wash your robes white with the blood of the Lamb, Revelation 7, verse 14. This morning, if you're not a Christian, understand, as a victim of time and chance, you need something beyond this life. But understand, dear Christian, that you too are a victim of time and chance. And you need that same protection. Maybe this morning you have ill-used the blessings that God has given you. Maybe the forgiveness that you found in Christ, maybe you have relinquished it. Maybe you've taken sin back up again because you've said, well, life doesn't mean much anyway. Oh, how much farther from the truth could you be than that? Life is full of meaning and purpose, but it's found in God Himself. And this morning, if you need to come back to Christ, let us help you do that now. Obey the gospel. Be restored as together we stand and sing.